"We the people of the United States," it's one of the most iconic lines in American history. But what if I told you that the man who wrote it wasn't just a brilliant political mind, but also one of the most scandalous, unpredictable, and downright wild figures of the founding era? Meet Gouverneur Morris, the forgotten founding father who lived like a rock star, partied like royalty, and left behind a legacy far more outrageous than any of his peers. Born in 1752 in the Bronx, Morris would go on to shape the U.S. Constitution more than almost any other delegate. But unlike the stoic image we have of America's founders, Morris was anything but conventional. He flirted with danger, literally and figuratively, indulged in forbidden affairs, survived life-altering scandals, and even fought off a mob using his wooden leg. He may have helped write the blueprint for American democracy, but he lived like he was starring in a scandalous novel, and trust me, this is just the beginning. Before Tinder or tabloid headlines, Gouverneur Morris was living the kind of romantic drama that would shock even today's standards. Long before settling down, he built a reputation as one of the most scandalous bachelors in America and Europe. While serving as a diplomat in France, Morris began a fiery, long-running affair with a married woman who lived in none other than the Louvre. Yes, the same place that now houses the Mona Lisa. Back then, it wasn't a museum, it was a royal palace, and a secret playground for Morris. In his private diary, Morris often used the word celebrating as code for sexual encounters. And the stories, wild. In one entry, he described having sex in a hallway of the Louvre with the doors wide open, while the woman's husband was downstairs and guests were expected at any moment. "We take the chance of interruption and celebrate in the passage. The doors are all open." Gouverneur Morris, in his journal, Morris didn't just take emotional risks. He took physical ones too. In Philadelphia at the age of 32, he lost his leg in an incident that was anything but innocent. According to historians, Morris had been caught sleeping with another man's wife, and while fleeing the enraged husband, he was struck by a carriage. The injury was so severe, his leg had to be amputated. His friends hoped the peg leg would slow him down. It did in single quotes. After a lifetime of outrunning danger, seducing scandal, and defying every social norm, Gouverneur Morris finally met a challenge he couldn't outwit: his own failing body. In his later years, Morris began suffering from a painful blockage in his urethra. Today, many believe he may have been battling prostate cancer. But rather than seek medical help, the ever-bold Morris took matters into his own hands. Literally. Armed with nothing but his determination and a dangerously misguided idea, he attempted to perform surgery on himself, his tool of choice, a whalebone. Yes, he inserted a piece of sharpened whalebone into his urethra, hoping to relieve the blockage. Instead, he caused internal injuries so severe that he died in agony just days later. A Boston newspaper at the time called it a short but distressing illness. It was a tragic end for a man who had lived like he was invincible, a founding father who had once faced down mobs, jumped from balconies, and lost a leg fleeing an affair, only to be undone by his own fearlessness. Morris lived boldly, and in the end, he died the same way, on his own terms. Consequences be damned. By the time Gouverneur Morris turned 57, most assumed he'd never settle down. After decades of affairs, scandal, and public escapades, the idea of Morris marrying anyone, let alone someone controversial, seemed impossible. Then came the shock. On Christmas Day in 1809, Morris stunned his social circle by marrying his housekeeper, a woman 22 years younger than him, named Nancy Randolph. But this wasn't just a matter of age or status. Nancy brought with her a storm of scandal that had followed her for nearly 2 decades. At just 17 years old, Nancy had been accused of adultery and murder. The story was explosive. She had allegedly had an affair with her own brother-in-law, become pregnant, and shortly after the baby's birth, the child died. Authorities accused her of killing the infant, a crime punishable by death. Nancy swore the baby was stillborn. In the end, she was acquitted, but her name never fully recovered. She was branded a fallen woman, whispered about in elite circles, and cast out by high society. And then Gouverneur Morris, the wild, one-legged founding father, gave her something no one else would: his name. "I marry this day in Carrie Randolph. No small surprise to my guests," he wrote in his diary. Ever the man who lived for the unexpected, their marriage didn't just raise eyebrows. It rewrote what was socially acceptable for the elite of the new nation. To scandal-marked souls, brought together in defiance of reputation, judgment, and the rules of polite society. You'd think losing a leg would slow someone down, not Gouverneur Morris. After his infamous accident in Philadelphia, Morris didn't retreat from the world. He simply replaced his leg with a wooden one and kept charging into life, scandals and all. In fact, that peg leg would go on to become both his signature and his unlikely weapon. while serving as U.S. Minister to France during the blood-soaked years of the French Revolution. Morris found himself in real danger. The streets were ruled by mobs, paranoia ran wild, and anything that smelled of aristocracy could get you killed. One afternoon, while riding in an ornate carriage with a lady companion, Morris was confronted by a furious crowd. Revolutionary rage was boiling over, and his polished vehicle and refined clothing screamed enemy of the people. But Morris didn't panic. Instead, he did something insane. Something only Gouverneur Morris would think to do. He ripped off his wooden leg, leaned out the window, and hurled it into the mob while shouting, "Vive la Revolution!" The stunned crowd paused, confused. In that single outrageous act, Morris had tricked the mob into believing he was one of them. And in that moment of hesitation, he ordered his coachman to drive away at full speed. He escaped with his life. Only Gouverneur Morris could turn a wooden leg into a getaway plan. Only he could survive a revolution by weaponizing his prosthetic and bluffing his way past death. When America set out to draft a brand new constitution in 1787, most of the founding fathers arrived in Philadelphia ready to defend their states, their wealth, and in many cases, their slaves. But Gouverneur Morris came with a different mission. He wasn't there just to edit documents or shake hands. He would go on to deliver more speeches than any other delegate. A staggering 173 interventions during the Constitutional Convention. Morris wasn't just present, he was dominant. And when it came time to shape the document that would govern a new nation, it was Morris who picked up the pen. To write the final draft of the U.S. Constitution, the original preamble was long, clunky, and named every state individually, but Morris rewrote it into something unforgettable. Something that would echo through American history: we the people of the United States. In order to form a more perfect union, that legendary phrase, his words. But Morris didn't just want a better government. He wanted a better moral foundation. While many of his fellow founders either owned slaves or quietly ignored the issue, Morris stood almost alone in his fiery opposition. He called slavery a nefarious institution. And during the convention, he didn't hold back. Proceed southwardly, and every step you take through the great regions of slaves presents a desert, increasing with the increasing proportion of these wretched beings. He knew slavery was evil, and he said it out loud when others stayed silent. He was the loudest voice for freedom, in a room full of men preaching liberty while denying it to others. In the story of America's founding, Gouverneur Morris wasn't just a writer. He was a rebel with a conscience. Gouverneur Morris didn't just help invent American democracy, he helped build New York City itself. Long before it became the skyscraper-filled metropolis we know today, New York was a patchwork of country roads, farmlands, and scattered buildings. But in the early 1800s, the city was growing fast, and someone had to plan its future. In 1807, Morris was appointed to a commission tasked with one of the boldest urban planning projects in American history, reimagining Manhattan. At the time, most cities were built in winding circles and elegant curves, a European style. But Morris saw something else: efficiency, order, and scale. Instead of fancy plazas and unpredictable layouts, the commission, under Morris's influence, proposed a revolutionary grid system. In 1811, they unveiled the plan: 155 east-west streets, 12 north-south avenues, clean, right-angled blocks designed for expansion and rapid growth. It was simple, modern, and wildly controversial. Critics complained that the straight lines lacked charm, but Morris wasn't trying to charm them. He was building a city for the future. That grid would become the backbone of Manhattan, allowing it to grow into one of the world's most powerful and densely populated cities. Of course, change came at a price. Nearly 40% of pre-grid buildings had to be demolished to make way for the new design. But Morris had done it again, just like he brought order to a chaotic government. With the Constitution, he brought vision to a chaotic city with a map. New York City didn't just happen. Gouverneur Morris drew the lines. Long before Manhattan's towering skyline or the roar of Wall Street, there was a quiet stretch of land along the Harlem River, green, open, and untouched. That's where Gouverneur Morris was born in 1752, on a sprawling estate in what is now the Bronx. Back then, it was 2,000 acres of farmland, rolling fields, and dairy cattle. His family had purchased the land in the 1670s, and it became known simply as Morrisania. As Morris rose in political power and personal legend. So did his ambitions for the estate. He built a grand mansion on the property, a reflection of both his wealth and his wild spirit. He even proposed, seriously, that the estate be used as the capital of the United States. Imagine that, not Washington, D.C., but the Bronx, though the capital went elsewhere. Morrisania remained his anchor. And when his storm-chasing life finally came to an end, Gouverneur Morris was buried in the place where it all began, St. Anne's. church right on his family land. The church still stands today, quietly holding the memory of a man most history books barely mention. There are no monuments, no grand tributes, but under the Bronx soil rests the man who helped write the Constitution, reshape Manhattan, and scandalize a new nation with every step of his peg leg. He lived loud, he died bold, and he left his mark in places few ever look. If you've ever tried to trace the Founding Fathers, the name Morris might leave you scratching your head. That's because Gouverneur Morris wasn't the only one making headlines, and his name wasn't the only one attached to power. There was also Lewis Morris, Gouverneur's half-brother, who signed the Declaration of Independence. Then there was Robert Morris, a brilliant financier of the Revolutionary War, who had no relation to Gouverneur by blood but shared his ambitions and his stage in history. Robert signed both the Declaration and the Constitution, and played a vital role in keeping the American military funded during its darkest days. At one point, Gouverneur and Robert were political allies, working together in the Senate to stabilize the young nation's shaky finances, but the stories of these Morrises didn't all end in triumph. Robert Morris, once one of the richest men in America, fell from grace in spectacular fashion. He gambled his fortune on land speculation, took massive financial risks, and watched it all collapse. In the end, he died nearly penniless. A tragic reminder that even founding fathers weren't immune to ruin. As for Gouverneur's unique first name, no, it wasn't a title. Gouverneur was his mother's maiden name, and despite its grand sound, it never caught on. Today, it's barely recognized as a baby name. So when history mentions Morris, it doesn't always mean Gouverneur, but it often means power, ambition, and a legacy tied to the very foundation of America, for better or worse. Before he became the wildest founding father with a wooden leg and a scandalous reputation, Gouverneur Morris was just a young political firebrand with a sharp tongue and a mind built for revolution. He entered the national stage early, serving in New York's revolutionary government, and soon after became one of the youngest members of the Continental Congress, a place where history was being made with every speech, vote, and midnight debate, and in those rooms filled with ambition, fear, and vision, Morris forged one of the most important friendships of his life with George Washington. Morris became a trusted ally of Washington, not just politically, but personally. He supported Washington's leadership when others turned critical, and he served on key committees where his voice carried weight and conviction. His words helped shape policies, and his arguments carried battles of principle. But what makes Morris's legacy even more vivid today is what he left behind: his meticulous journals. He documented everything: the politics, the passions, the personal struggles, and the private triumphs through his own writing. We hear a voice that was sharp, witty, unfiltered, and sometimes outrageous, a rare look into the raw truth of the Revolutionary era. Beyond the polished portraits and patriotic myths, he didn't just live through history, he wrote it, he recorded it, and in many ways, he defined it.